Hello there. I am actor and content creator FrasWhar, and I am joined by award-winning modder, ex-lawyer, modern storyteller, and by all accounts, lovely bloke, Nick Pearce. Nick, thank you very much for making the time for this, mate. How are you?
Pretty well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not bad at all. Thank you. And we're going to be talking about your game, The Forgotten City, which is pretty damn exciting. As of this recording, what have we got? 2 days until?
Yes, 2 days
until it comes out.
So
I mean, by the time editing and everything happens, it'll probably be
1
day, or maybe it'll be on the day of release, but we'll see what happens. Right, so to paraphrase the store page, The Forgotten City is a mystery adventure game of exploration and deduction. Combat is an option, but violence will only get you so far, and the player will be traveling 2,000 years into the past to relive the final days of a cursed Roman city. I mean, it sounds absolutely amazing, mate. And I've looked at a lot of the teasers that you've put out, and yeah, color me intrigued. Are you excited?
Yeah, I am. I think it's I mean, it's been a 4.5 year development cycle, so I'm very, very excited to get it out there and get it in people's hands, and frankly, to go and take some time off once it's all done.
I can imagine. So before we talk about the game, I'd love to learn a little bit more about the team, because you've got a very small team that you've handpicked yourself. I was wondering if you could introduce them and give us a rundown on how they made the cut.
Sure. So there are 3 main team members, and there's me, obviously. There's also Alex Goss, who's our programmer. Before he joined our team, he'd just finished working on a VR spacewalk sim in consultation with NASA called Earthlight VR.
And I just met him.
Incredible. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's pretty cool. And so I met him at a party by chance, and we got talking and just kind of clicked, and within a few weeks he'd come over and started working with me. So yeah, that was pretty cool.
Did you get to explore the VR that he'd created?
I did, yeah, it's pretty impressive. And then the second member of the team, or the other third member of the team, is John Eyre, who's an Australian 3D artist, who's worked at Defiant, which is a studio that made Hand of Fate and Hand of Fate 2. Really exceptional artist. The first time I saw his ArtStation profile, I just went, wow, this is the guy. And I was fortunate enough that we're able to get him on board, and he's been with us for quite a few years as well. So yeah, we are a very small team, but we like to think that we're punching above our weight.
Nice. I mean, some of the shots that I've seen look absolutely gorgeous. So yeah, you've done well bringing these people together. What's it like working in such a close-knit team?
It's great, actually. I think the more people on your team, the more potential for miscommunication there is. So if you have a really small group of people, you can sort of keep a really cohesive vision of the end product, and there's less sort of So I think it's good for staying on vision and on message. Yeah.
So obviously, I mean, it's impossible to talk about things at the minute without bringing the pandemic into focus. Has it affected the way that you've had to go at this development at all?
Not so much. We're sort of I like to think of us as the hipsters of working from home, insofar as we were doing it before it became cool. So we were sort of old school working from home people, and yeah, when the pandemic shut us down, and I'm in Melbourne, where I'm now currently in my 5th consecutive lockdown.
Wow.
It hasn't really had much impact on my life, just because I'm a massive nerd and I stay inside all the time anyway. But I've worked such long hours that it's sort of that there's very little temptation to leave the house, because I've just got so much to do. And I think we're all in a similar boat here in Australia.
That's fair. Now, before we get into talking about the game itself, we've learned a little bit about the team. I'd love to just touch on your life and how you got to where you are, because that's a rather interesting story in itself. Now, the game is a reimagining of a mod that you created for Skyrim. It's an incredible mod. I've been watching some of the playthroughs of it for research. The writing is amazing. Have you always been into creative writing?
Yeah, I think I mean, while I was a lawyer, I was sort of pretty bored, and so I started a writers group. So every Wednesday at lunchtime, myself and a few other aspiring writers would get together and workshop a new chapter of one of our novels. And so yeah, I've sort of been into creative writing for quite a while, and the creative itch was always there.
Yeah.
And I just was fortunate enough to find a creative outlet through modding.
So you said that you had like a writers group, and have you written novels before, or is it?
I
that
was
like
writing a
hobbyist?
novel at the time.
Right.
Yeah, but it hasn't seemed. To be honest, I realized that I was far more excited and passionate about video games than I was about novel writing. But I think one of the problems with being an aspiring video game writer is that there are very few opportunities to write a video game, because you just can't. You can't get a job without experience, and you can't get experience without a job. It's this catch-22, right?
Yeah.
And so modding is the way that you break that catch-22. So you can just take an existing game, take the modding toolkit, and then just write your own story directly into a game, and you can find out if it works or not, because you can't. There's no way of knowing whether your game story is going to work until it's actually a part of a game, because on paper it's still this abstract thing. So I think that's one of the reasons that modding is this wonderful sort of and not very well explored outlet. So I think if there are aspiring creative writers out there who are interested in video games, get into modding. It's the best.
Excellent. So before that, growing up, did you have more interested in creating games and on modding?
Yeah, so I had a really crusty old computer, an 8086, when I was a small kid.
Very
and
nice.
it very quickly became out of date, so I couldn't play any of the latest games on it. So I had to while away my time by teaching myself to program in GW and QBasic. So I sort of learned the very basic sort of building blocks of programming, and started making really terrible little games and sharing them with my friends for their amusement. And then I started modding levels for some of my favorite FPSs when I was a sort of teenager. So I always had this sort of this sort of creative itch to make games, but there just weren't really any opportunities to sort of explore and pursue that properly professionally in Australia in 1999 when I was trying to choose what I wanted to study at uni. So I ended up just blowing that off and becoming a lawyer for a while. But like I said, that creative itch just sort of stuck with me for a while, and then so I had the opportunity to mod, and that went well. And so finally I had the opportunity to go and do what I really wanted to do, which is make video games.
That's amazing. Excellent. What was the first game that you ever owned? What was the first game that you could say was yours?
The Secret of Monkey Island, which is, I just love it. It's such a even to this day, if you play it without having played it back in the day and having that nostalgia, it still holds up ridiculously well in terms of narrative. It's just so funny and clever and quirky, and
I mean, if I didn't like you before, mate, I'd like you a little bit more now, because mine is pretty much exactly the same, but it's Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge. I remember getting taken to the store by my mum and my dad, being like, "What's okay? You get to pick one of these out, and it's yours." And
that was exactly my experience too. Yeah,
amazing. No, I like geekdom is pretty cool nowadays. It's certainly a lot cooler than it was when I was growing up. Did you ever have to deal with any of that, like, stigma? Because you're saying you were distributing your games to your mates and things.
Oh, look, all of my friends are pretty nerdy as well. Don't worry about that. So that was fine. Actually, the funny thing, I think probably the most stigma I had to deal with was when I was in the legal profession. I'd been making my mod. It was a sort of don't ask, don't tell kind of thing. There was no reason for me to tell them about it.
Right.
It was just I was doing in my spare time. But yeah, once it started getting international media coverage, one of the senior colleagues sort of called me over to his computer, points at his screen where there's this, I think it was like a PC Gamer or something article on the screen, and he goes, "Is this you?" And I was like, "Yes." And yeah, my relationship with my colleagues changed after that. It was a bit different.
Interesting.
Because I think in the legal profession, some people take the view that that every waking hour of your life should be spent focused on your legal career, and I know that because someone literally said that to me.
Oh wow. Okay.
And so ultimately, I felt that I had this choice between continuing with my legal career and doing something that I was really passionate about and possibly quite good at, according to the reviews of the mod. So so yeah, I just, that was one of the reasons that I ended up taking the leap, and I'm very glad that I did.
When did your focus change the first time round from obviously you quite enjoyed the creative aspect of games? When did you first focus on like training as a lawyer, and why did you pick that specifically?
Look, I was in year 12. I'd won the literature and debating prizes, so for me it just seemed like a no-brainer. I like words and I like arguing with people, so I just so being a lawyer seemed like a natural sort of continuation of that. And look, I'm glad I did it. It was a great experience, and I learned an enormous amount. And I think having just a solid set of general professional skills will help you in any career path.
Yeah.
But yeah, with that said, I was definitely getting a bit bored of it by the time I was ready to jump into game dev.
Yeah, and I mean, here you are, some years later, like with just a couple of days left to go until the release of your fully fledged game. How are you feeling?
Look, a little bit nervous, but also mostly pretty zen. I mean, I think I've got what I wanted out of it. I had a wonderful time making it, and there are lots of really wonderful parts of the game that still make me really happy every time I see them. Yeah, I think however it sort of pans out, I'll be happy with what I've done. I'm sort of looking forward to finding out what the future holds.
That's a good way of looking at it. So apart from waking up at like 6 a.m. to a shot of adrenaline, what's taking up your time at the minute?
I'm mostly just doing sort of interviews and doing last minute bits of polishing prep and making sure that all of our sort of troubleshooting system is set up and ready to go when people need a bit of help on launch day. So yeah, I think things are mostly under control.
Excellent. How does the stress of this compare with the stress of being a lawyer?
I think it's a bit different, but I think it's very exhilarating. I sometimes say that being a game dev or sort of taking the leap from being a lawyer to game dev is a bit like jumping out of an airplane and hoping to learn to fly by the time you hit the ground. That's the kind of exhilaration, but it's a kind of a good exhilaration because you're doing it out of love instead of obligation or terror or sort of anything else. It's like, this is what I want to do, so I'm willing to take risks, and yeah, it's fun.
Nice. Now you briefly touched about like back-breaking amounts of hours that you were doing, and I don't want to talk about that without having a little bit of a talk about crunch culture in general, because it's quite a big issue. I mean, in a lot of industries, but it's a rising issue in the gaming industry. This idea that you've got to break your back to get the deadlines out, whatever it is. What is your relationship with crunch culture?
So look, first of all, I don't let my staff work the kind of hours that I work. So they all work sort of 9 to 5, pretty comfortable hours. I've worked much longer hours than that out of necessity because we're a small team making a very ambitious game, and it just would not have been possible to make this game without me working really long hours. And that's something that I want to be clear about. I don't. It's not healthy or sustainable, and it's certainly not something that I encourage. But I think sometimes, unfortunately, especially for small startups, it's necessary to sort of to stretch a bit. But certainly, for our next project, I would structure things in such a way that I have a bit more support. I'd probably hire a producer. So at the moment, I wear a lot of hats. So I'm the director, writer, producer, and designer, as well as the legal counsel, payroll person, and so on and so forth. I would definitely bring on more people for the next project, but we weren't able to do that for this project because it's just we're a small team. But yeah, I think that's the way to deal with these issues.
Yeah, I mean, you're a small team now, but you were an even smaller team when you made the mod. You're just a team of one, and you had a full career that you were doing at the same time. How did you make time to make the mod in the first place?
Well, it took me 1,700 hours, and I know that because the software I was using actually keeps account of how long you've spent with it open. Right. So yeah, 1,700 hours over 3 years is about 11 hours a week. So I was just basically I had 11 hours a week of spare time, and I would spend that modding, and then I would go to work, and often I'd sort of wake up in the middle of the night with an idea about the mod and just quickly roll over, write it down, and go back to sleep because it was pretty I invested a lot of energy into it, and it was because it was fun. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Well, with those 3 years that you spent on it as a mod, and then the 4 years that have taken you to this point, you could sort of, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you can kind of say that this has been in development for about 9 years, like to get to this point.
Yeah, I'd say so. That's probably
It's
fair.
a 9-year arc. So I just wondered, when did the original nucleus of the game start to form for you?
Good question. So I think it came about pretty organically because I'd got the modding toolkit for this game that I'm not allowed to mention, and I'd started making a just a sort of a generic fantasy hallway. I was just teaching myself the basics of how to make levels, and so the hallway evolved into this ancient underground city, and I thought it was pretty cool. But the problem was that it was quite boring. It was just like yet another big, empty, ancient, ruined city.
Right.
And there was nothing interesting about it. And so I just thought, I wonder what it would be like if you could travel back in time in the city and kind of, walk among the people who used to live here, and what would that be like? And I think that I remember thinking at the time that would be fun. And so I then built the city in a couple of different timelines, and I think I ended up building there ended up being 3 or maybe 4 different timelines of the same space, and I came up with a script in Engine about how to sort of move the player back and forth between those 2 different timelines sort of relatively seamlessly. And so yeah, that was the nucleus, as you say, of the game.
Nice.
And yeah, just everything else just sort of evolved from there.
I mean, it's been a long time, and you've had a lot of praise heaped on you. So I hope you're not too bored about talking about the original mod. Obviously, we're going to talk about the game more in a second. But with like upwards of 3.7 million downloads, you got an Australian Writers Guild Award, and like the press absolutely heaped praise on you. At what point was it that you realized that you'd made something special?
I sort of took it all with a grain of salt. I don't really let myself feel flattery, so because you never know when someone's just sort of blowing smoke, so so I didn't really believe any of the hype. I just kind of thought, I was happy with what I'd made, and that was all that really mattered to me. But then Kotaku wrote an article where they said that the Forgotten City was ambitious enough to be its own game, and I thought, that's an interesting. Oh no, I couldn't possibly. And then I had a couple of beers with some Australian devs at League of Geeks, Blake Mitzi and Trent Custers, and they asked me, why don't you make it into a standalone game? And I didn't really have a very good answer for that at the time. I just had excuses, really, which is that I didn't have a budget, and I didn't have time, and I had no idea how to make a standalone game, which are pretty good excuses, to be fair.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, but then I went away and thought about it for a while, and I just sort of chipped away at it and just sort of tried to solve one problem at a time until I actually realized I had an opportunity to go and do what I've always wanted to do, and so yeah, I quit my job and took the leap.
Amazing. Right, so like mods are nothing new. They've been around for a long time. Without naming any names, obviously some games might even owe quite a lot to modders for fixing and adding content to games. But there's a rich legacy of mods that turn into games eventually. I did a little bit of research. You've got Killing Floor, Red Orchestra. They were Unreal Tournament mods. Dota was a Warcraft 3 mod. PUBG, Arma 3. Chex Quest was one of the original Doom clones that was included in cereal boxes. I never got one myself.
Some of my favorites are Dear Esther and the Stanley Parable as well.
I was just about to say Stanley Parable. I absolutely love the Stanley Parable. And yeah, there are a whole host of other ones that were based off of like Half-Life and Half-Life 2. But this is, as far as I can see, this is the first time that Skyrim mod has made it to a completely fully fledged standalone game. Now, to get a bit abstract for a second, obviously everything that we are goes into everything that we do. Like whatever your experience shape what you make. What Absolutely. Is it about the fact that you made the mod that has made it evolve into this full-fledged game?
I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, to be honest. Can you sort of come at it from another angle?
Yeah, as in, so your experiences in real life, what exactly are those, what fed into making this game? And what made that successful over someone else making it? Like anybody could have made it, but the fact that
Yeah,
you
I think I
made it,
understand.
yeah.
Okay, yeah, that's a good question. I think so there certainly have been a lot of other fantastic mods made with that game, and it is interesting to me that so far they haven't become standalone games. But I think one of the reasons, I think there are two sort of main reasons. One is um, my mod was a solo project, and that meant that when it came time to switching it from a mod to a standalone game, there were no complex IP considerations. I know, I'm friends with other modders from that community who have said that we couldn't make our mod into a standalone game because the intellectual property is owned collectively by a whole bunch of people who made the mod, and it
Right.
would be really difficult to sort of disentangle and transpose that into a standalone game. In my case, it was pretty easy because it's, everything that's in the standalone game is my intellectual property, so there's no issue. The second reason is that some mods are too much sort of entangled with the intellectual property of the underlying game. So if your game is really, really sort of basically inseparable from the base game, then it's going to be really difficult to extract. But in my case, the Forgotten City, it was relatively easy to extricate my IP from that mod to the standalone game, and I've sort of transposed it from a sort of a fantasy setting to a sort of a real world setting in a fictional ancient Roman city with historically authentic art and architecture and costumes and customs and so on. So I think those are the reasons that the Forgotten City was able to be transposed, whereas some other games would have a harder time at it.
Interesting. Thank you. Yeah, cheers. So speaking of the setting, why Rome?
Another good question. So look, I've been an ancient Rome nerd for a while. I have a stack of reference books, and I've travelled around Italy and watched a lot of documentaries and that sort of thing. With that said, I'm certainly not an expert, which is why I eventually brought in the big guns. Specifically, I've got a couple of historical consultants working with me, Dr. Philip Matijak, who has a DPhil from Oxford and teaches at Cambridge and has written 17 books, and Dr. Sophie Hay, who spent 20 years excavating the ruins of Pompeii. Both, extremely knowledgeable and really lovely people, by the way. But anyway, so I wanted to set it in ancient Rome because a couple of reasons. First of all, the game is about collective punishment, right? So the core plot is there's a city which has a curse, and under that curse, if one person sins, everyone dies. That's a form of collective punishment, and collective punishment was well known to the Romans. They had decimation, this really shocking military practice where if there was a mutiny brewing within a cohort, then the cohort would be broken into groups of 10, and 1 in 10 men would be executed for the crimes of the collective, regardless of whether or not they'd done anything wrong. And another example is in Roman mythology. The Roman poet Ovid told the story of Baucis and Philemon, where basically a city was wiped out because it failed a bizarre morality test set by the gods. So this story about a city where if one person sins, everyone dies fits naturally with sort of ancient Rome. I think it's also just really interesting to explore an ancient Roman city, and I personally have sort of fantasized about traveling back in time, and I think a lot of other people have too. And so being able to sort of create this city with all this historically authentic art and architecture has been a lot of fun, but it's also really, really interesting to explore. And there's lots of little historical details in there for sort of fellow history nerds. And then finally, there are some other reasons too, which I can't really talk about without spoiling major plot points. So I think I'll just
okay. We'll zip that one. So the OG mod, obviously, you've got to work with the assets that you're given, which is not a constraint that you've got when you can build your own world. What was the most important thing in terms of assets that you wanted to add to the game?
Well, look, we added every asset because essentially we had to rebuild the project from the ground up in Unreal with 100% new assets. So we've sort of it's a new city, new setting, new game world. All the characters are new, all the voice acting is new, the orchestral score is new, the script has been entirely rewritten. I'd say probably the script, which is now twice as long as the original one, is probably my sort of favorite upgrade. The script for the mod always felt like a first draft to me, and I'd never had the chance to sort of get the help of an editor or anything. So being able to take my time to sort of rewrite the script and fix the problems and add a whole bunch of new twists and quests and endings was for me definitely my most the part I found the most satisfying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we'll touch on story a little bit more in a second, but just having a look through some of the teasers that you've put out on like Twitter and things, the detail that goes into all of the items that you can pick up and interact with in the game. Do you have a favorite item that has been added?
I wouldn't say item. I think the graffiti is a lot of fun. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but in ancient Rome, there was quite a lot of graffiti, and we know because a lot of it has survived, and it's quite fascinating to read it, and sort of see how hilariously smutty and obscene it is. And I think it's sort of.
Sorry, I think I saw one of them that was around a fella had an orgy in a bathhouse and it failed to satisfy any of the other participants, should we say?
So I think it surprises people to learn that ancient Romans could be really quite earthy and funny, because I think the way they're depicted in a lot of historical fiction is very sort of serious, and you think of Caesar and you think of all these senators in their togas. What you don't think about is sort of people, common class people who are writing obscene things and drawing penises on walls and that sort of thing. But it's an important part of the piecing together what ancient Roman culture was like. And so I worked with Dr. Matizak to come up with some Latin graffiti that's sort of sprinkled around the world that adds lots of flavor, and it's kind of fun to explore, and is also attached to an achievement. So if you want to get all the achievements, you're going to have to read the graffiti.
I'm a big fan of achievements, so that speaks to me quite a bit. Did you come up with anything else interesting in all of the research that you've done?
Probably, look, first of all, I'll say that Dr. Matizak and I exchanged well over 300 emails over the space of 20 months about all sorts of aspects of ancient Roman sort of history and archaeology, and I learned an enormous amount. But I'd say by far the things that get the most guffaws are the public toilet, where it's really very bizarre. Ancient Roman public toilets didn't have partitions, meaning that you could make eye contact with people sort of over the aisle from you if you so chose. And I'm told by Dr. Matizak that people, it could be quite a social occasion to go to the toilet. You could sit down and have a chat with your friends. And then after that, you might clean yourself with a sponge on a stick, because they didn't have toilet paper. And so there was this communal sponge on a stick that just kind of sat in the middle. And wow. Really horrifying in terms of hygiene. But yeah, it's so we've faithfully recreated this public toilet just because we thought it was amusing and fascinating. And so there's lots of little things like that people can go around and explore.
Yeah. I mean, not just the public toilets, but like the art and the architecture. You've put so much effort into the making it accurate. How important was that to you when you were setting out?
Yeah, well, we were really committed to getting everything right to the extent possible. So, for example, we'd model the front of a temple, and then we would get advice saying, no, look, your columns are too close together or too far apart, and the even the striations running up and down the columns, that's not quite right. So we're absolutely trying to get tiny little details like that right. And I think at one point in the script, I had a whole bunch of characters referring to this particular temple as a temple, and then Dr. Matizak pointed out, well, actually that would technically be a shrine because it doesn't meet the definition of temple. So I had to go back and edit all of those lines to make people refer to it as shrine.
Wow.
So yeah, we were pretty committed, and I'm not aware of any sort of residual errors. Everything that was identified that we could fix, we have fixed. But with that said, it's no doubt there will be people out there who can find issues with it, and if they can, and if they've got evidence to back up their point, then we're absolutely open to them sort of pointing it out to us, and we'll do our best to fix it in a future patch update.
Yeah, it looks like you've done an amazing amount of groundwork. So I can't imagine there being too much, but I suppose time will tell. But obviously, alongside all of the historical accuracy, there is a fair amount of fantasy in the game itself.
Yeah.
There's
it's like mythology in the sense that the fictional elements are rooted in ancient Roman mythology. So there's nothing in there that I've just sort of, or there's not very much in there that I've just sort of made up. For example, you would have seen people being turned into gold in the trailers, and so that's sort of follows on from from mythology about the goddess Diana. So the ancient Roman goddess Diana, who the Greeks called Artemis, had a mythical golden bow, and so in the game the player is able to undertake a heist to steal that bow from her shrine, and is then able to to use it. I mean, so I think it's the fictional aspect is certainly rooted in mythology, but we've had a bit of fun playing around with it.
Yeah. I've seen some of the puzzles that you've shown around the bow. It looks really, really good. Speaking of which, how do you start with making a puzzle? Do you start with the bow? Do you start with what you want the player to get out of it? Because you obviously want it to be interesting and rewarding once it's done. But where's the start point?
It's a good question. So one of the starting points for us was that because this is an indie game and not a AAA action RPG with a massive budget and massive team, originally I thought about having a whole bunch of weapons in the game, but it just, we weren't going to be able to do it justice with the kind of production budget that we had. So I thought, well, instead of trying to do a whole wide variety of combat badly, what we should do is focus on something that's unique, and something that that hasn't been done before. And so we ran with this idea of the mythical golden bow, which turns anything organic into gold. So and then we sort of thought about, okay, how can we have some fun with this? And so, for example, one of the ways is that if you can sort of shoot an enemy with it and turn them into a golden statue, and then as another enemy sort of is coming towards you, if you can position yourself right, you can sort of boot the golden statue into the oncoming enemy and topple them over like Skittles, and that's really fun and satisfying. Or if, for example, if you come to a river that you can't cross, or a pond that's covered in algae, you could shoot the algae, turn it into gold, and then just walk across it like Jesus walking on water. And then of course, I think one of the other examples that we've shared is in a particular shrine, there's a big hornet's nest, affixed to the ceiling. So if you shoot that, turn it into gold, under its own weight, it falls and smashes a hole in the shrine floor, which then allows you to escape. So yeah, there's lots of sort of fun, interesting ways that we've managed to use this golden bow device, and I think I'm hoping that people will have fun exploring and using it to access little secret locations that they couldn't have accessed otherwise.
Yeah. Speaking of gameplay devices, there's a time loop mechanic in the game. Could you just touch on that for 2 seconds?
Sure. So it's kind of a Groundhog Day style time loop, but it's a little bit different in that if you die, you're dead. So you can't just die and restart the day again. But what happens is if you or anybody else breaks the golden rule, then all hell breaks loose, and it triggers this apocalyptic event which begins wiping out everyone in the city. But if you're fast and nimble enough, then you'll be able to escape back to the time portal from which you originated. And if you can run that gauntlet, then you can leap into the time portal and then essentially rewind time to the beginning of the day, having retained all the knowledge and items that you got from previous time loops. So it's a little bit different. So that's why I say it's different to other time loop games, because you can steal things from one timeline and bring them into another timeline, and that opens up really interesting things. For example, and this is, I don't think I'm spoiling much by saying this, but when you first arrive in the city, you'll find a woman who's dying and then dead because of being poisoned, and because she couldn't get life-saving medicine in time. So what you can do is steal that life-saving medicine, triggering that apocalyptic event, and then race back to the portal, begin your day all over again, and this time race back down to the dying woman just in time to give her this medicine, and then she's then able to tell you what happened to her, which then sort of furthers your investigation. So there are all these little loops and ways that you can cleverly exploit the time loop to sort of advance the story and sort of ultimately solve the mystery.
Now, there's a lot of references to the excess of gold in the city, like basically making it worthless. It's like littering the streets. This idea that having an abundance of something that others might covet, is that something that was subconsciously added, or is it an intentional thing that you wanted to bring to the game?
No, I think it was just I can't even remember exactly. I think it just started with because in the mod it was different. In the mod, it was just everybody got burned to death. But that was a bit boring and extreme. And I wanted to shake things up a bit for the game and make some interesting and novel changes. So yeah, we landed on gold. And one of the reasons I think was that we figured out how to get this awesome effect of, someone gets hit by a golden arrow and slowly like this layer of gold just sort of creeps up over them and they sort of, their movements slow down until they just kind of stop. And then, if they're posed just right, they'll just sort of topple over under the weight of their own physics. So I think it's a really cool effect. And it reminds me a little bit of that scene in Game of Thrones where Daenerys' brother got the gold treatment. I don't know if you remember that one, but yeah. So we just think it's kind of cool.
Excellent. I mean, talking about like themes of the game, it's quite a moral story. At the core of it, with the golden rule, the idea that like if one person sins, everyone suffers. What made you want to make that story in particular?
So I've always been interested in philosophy. As a teenager, I was part of a church, and I've since sort of thought my way out of that. I'm now an atheist, but I've certainly always maintained a strong interest in theology and philosophy, and read lots of different thinkers, and so having a story that is so squarely anchored in these sort of really fundamental questions of morality allowed us to explore a whole bunch of different philosophical ways of thinking from the ancient world. So, for example, in the game, there are characters who are Roman, who are early first century Christian, who are Jewish, who are Egyptian, and so on, and Greek. And so, one of the really interesting things about all of those cultures is that they all have some very similar takes on the sort of the cornerstone of morality. So, for example, Christians, the cornerstone of Christian morality is arguably, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. The Egyptians had do to the doer to make him do. The Roman Stoics had treat your inferior as you would wish your superior to treat you. So yeah, there are all these really interesting common threads between all these different ancient cultures who are spaced thousands of years apart in some cases. And so yeah, I think it's really interesting to sort of highlight the similarities and try to explore some of the difficulties with applying those rules of morality. So I think in the ordinary course of things, like rules of morality, sometimes they don't really mean very much because there are not really many consequences to lying or cheating or stealing. Sometimes if people don't know about it, then it doesn't matter. But in this sort of fictional environment we've created, it really does matter. So you can't just go around doing any of these things. You need to think really carefully about what you're going to say and what you're going to do. And so it's a really interesting sort of vehicle for exploring some of the sort of dark corners of morality and human society.
Yeah, it certainly makes for a great setting for the game. I'm very, very interested to explore that one. Now, I just wanted to say, obviously, because it was previously a mod, and there's a whole host of people out there that are going to play this that may have already played it before. The store page says that you've taken the best elements of the mod. What were the bits that you really wanted to preserve?
So look, fundamentally the things we've preserved are the title and the premise. So as with the mod, you discover the ruins of an ancient underground city, travel back in time, try to figure out who or what is going to get everybody killed. But everything else has been leveled up. So I've rewritten the script, which is now about twice as long, and it has new twists, and quests and story beats and endings. We've got new characters. Some of them are sort of reimaginings of characters who were in the mod, but there are a bunch of new characters. We've got a beautiful new orchestral score by Michael Allen, the guy who made the music for Armello. We've got professional voice acting from a wonderful cast of actors, including Roger Ringrose, who's in the Witcher TV series, there's a bunch of other stuff too. There's new gameplay mechanics, including the sort of mythical golden bow that allows you to turn, anything organic into gold. So yeah, I really wanted to make sure that anyone who's played the mod already would find lots of new and fun content to explore in this, and I think we've achieved that. So yeah, I think if you like the mod, then you're really going to love the game.
Excellent. Am I right in saying that there's 4 separate classes for you to?
Yeah, that's right. And they each have a subtle advantage. There is the soldier, archaeologist, amnesiac, and fugitive.
And from some of the pictures I've seen, one of them has a gun that they can take back with them.
Yeah, that's right. That's kind of a fun touch. So yeah, if you choose the soldier, your subtle advantage is gun, which is
very subtle.
You have a pistol and 10 bullets, but you can never get more. So you really have to sort of use them judiciously. And I think that actually kind of makes it more fun, because you have to really, like, every bullet counts. And just a word to the wise, you'll want to save at least 1 bullet for the endings.
Right. Interesting insider information. You were just saying about characters, and obviously you've expanded the script to almost double the size. Where did you start off when it came to creating the characters themselves?
As in the characters for the standalone
like the
game,
NPCs that you're going to interact with in the game.
So it's a bit tricky, because when you're trying to create a sort of an historically authentic ancient Roman community, your starting point is, all right, well, how would this society have functioned? How would people have survived in this underground city where they're cut off from the rest of the world? And so, funnily enough, it sort of started with food and just answering the question, well, how are these people going to eat and drink and live? So I think one of the first characters I wrote was a farmer. And then, there's a baker and a tavern keeper, and merchants and that sort of thing. So it was sort of it just sort of evolved from that sort of really concrete grassroots level, just to make sure that the game world felt like a livable and believable space. That's sort of how it evolved.
Nice. This question's a little bit for me. I'm sure there's people out there that are going to find this interesting, but it might not be everyone. As an actor, I'm always interested in like the casting process to how it got to how you got all of these voice actors involved. Like, what was the process there?
So good question. So I used primarily Bedelgo, which is an online sort of portal for auditioning and casting voice actors. I'd heard good things about it from my local voice actor friends, and so I started putting out all these casting calls, and I think I listened to about 1,500 casting calls, so 1,500 auditions in the space of a couple of weeks, because it was Melbourne's first or second lockdown, and I wasn't allowed to leave the house basically. And so I just thought, all right, well, I'm going to make the most of this by just doing nothing but by casting. And so yeah, in that very short window, I listened to an enormous amount of actors, and some of the decisions were really difficult, because there are an awful lot of really talented actors out there who are especially at home in a pandemic, like they're not able to get out and go to auditions. So these sort of online portals become even more important than they were before. And I think the owner of the site once said that they'd seen a surge in about, like, I think it's something like a 30% surge at the time of the number of people for those roles. So it was a wonderful experience, and I had a really, really lovely time chatting with and meeting some of these new shockingly talented actors who are willing to lend their services to my little game.
I'm glad it was an enjoyable process. We're sort of almost out of time, but one last thing that I really want to ask. Easter eggs. Have you put any Easter eggs in the game? Is there any that you can hint at now that people can be looking for?
I think the one that I really want to tell you about is also potentially a plot spoiler. It's sort of hard to explain, but basically, if you're a massive history nerd, then you will probably figure out some key plot points a little bit sooner than everybody else if you take your time and explore and just have a look in every sort of nook and cranny. But I think that's probably all I can say at this point.
Okay. Just keep eyes peeled then.
Definitely.
Well, Nick, I'm gonna let you go now. Thank you so flipping much for making time to have a chat. And yeah, I hope by the end of this week things will have settled down and you can start getting some more sleep.
Yeah.
All the best with the release. I'm looking forward to getting my hands on it myself.
Thanks, mate. Nice talking to you.
Yeah, all the best.